We have suffered a great defeat at Lake Trasimene. The legions are destroyed. Our lands are burning, yet the Senate commands delay.
Hold formation! Keep your ranks tight! Where are they coming from?
Maintain the pace, men! Keep moving eastward!
Hold the line! Lock shields! Push forward, men! Across the river! For Rome! We can't swim in this armor! Help me!
The fog was not an accident. Hannibal Barca spent days studying the terrain around Lake Trasimene in central Italy. He walked the ground, he assessed the hills, he noted the narrow strip of land between the lake and the rising slopes above it, and he waited, not for the Romans. He knew the Romans were coming. Gaius Flaminius and his army of roughly 40,000 men were following him north through Etruria, and Flaminius was not the kind of commander who stopped to think carefully before acting. Hannibal was waiting for the weather. Specifically, he was waiting for the conditions that produced fog off the lake in the early morning hours. Dense enough to reduce visibility to meters. Dense enough that a man could not see the person standing next to him clearly. Dense enough that 40,000 Roman soldiers marching along a narrow lakeshore path would not be able to see the Carthaginian army positioned above them on the hills until it was too late to do anything about it. The fog arrived on the morning of June 21st, 217 BC. Hannibal gave the order. What followed lasted roughly 3 hours and killed somewhere between 15 and 25,000 Roman soldiers. It is considered one of the greatest ambushes in military history. And the part that is genuinely difficult to absorb, the part that military historians still examine with something close to disbelief, is that Flaminius led his army into it willingly, predictably, having been given every reason to know that something exactly like this was being prepared for him. He walked into it anyway. Hannibal did not start the Second Punic War. His father did, or rather, the situation his father created did. Hannibal Barca, Hannibal's father, had watched Carthage lose the First Punic War to Rome in 241 BC, lose Sicily, lose its naval position in the Western Mediterranean, pay an enormous indemnity that strained Carthaginian finances for years. Hamilcar did not accept this as permanent. He moved to Spain, spent years building a new base of power for Carthage, mines, alliances with Spanish tribes, a trained army funded by Spanish silver. He was killed in battle in Spain in 228 BC. His son-in-law Hasdrubal continued the project, was assassinated in 221 BC. Hannibal, Hamilcar's son, who had been in Spain since childhood, who had grown up in the army his father was building, took command. He was 25 years old. He had spent his entire conscious life around soldiers and campaigns, had watched his father plan and execute military operations across 2 decades of Spanish campaigning, had absorbed, apparently with extraordinary retention, everything that Hellenistic military thinking had produced about the conduct of war. He was also operating with a specific strategic problem. Rome was more powerful than Carthage, militarily, economically, demographically. A direct confrontation on Rome's terms, a war of attrition that Rome could sustain and Carthage could not, would eventually produce a Carthaginian defeat. Hannibal could not fight Rome's war. He had to fight a completely different war and force Rome to fight it on his terms. That recognition, and its strategic implications, explains everything that followed. In 218 BC, Hannibal did something that Roman military planners had not seriously considered as a possibility. He marched an army across the Alps in late autumn, roughly 90,000 soldiers when he left Spain, around 26,000 when he reached the Po Valley in northern Italy. The crossing killed men to cold, to falls, to Gallic resistance in the mountain passes, to the simple attrition of moving an army including war elephants through terrain that barely allowed individual travelers to pass. He arrived in Italy with a battered, reduced, deeply experienced army, and he immediately won. At the Trebia River in December 218 BC, he defeated a Roman army commanded by Tiberius Sempronius Longus. The engagement demonstrated several things simultaneously. Hannibal's cavalry was superior to Roman cavalry. His ability to coordinate different arms of his force was exceptional, and Roman commanders could be drawn into disadvantageous positions by applying the right bait. At Trebia, the bait was a cavalry attack that prompted a Roman advance across a cold river before the soldiers had eaten breakfast. Hannibal's forces, positioned on both banks, destroyed the force that emerged on the other side. Rome replaced the lost army, sent new commanders. One of them was Gaius Flaminius. Gaius Flaminius was not an incompetent man. This is worth stating clearly because the traditional account of Trasimene, shaped largely by Polybius and Livy, Roman historians writing with access to sources but also with Roman rhetorical traditions that required defeated commanders to carry responsibility for their defeats, tends toward caricature. Flaminius was politically ambitious. He had a record of popular legislation that made him enemies in the Senate. He was aggressive as a commander, inclined toward action over caution. These characteristics, ambition, aggressiveness, impatience with delay, are not inherently military failings. Many successful commanders share them. Hannibal understood that in Flaminius, these characteristics could be weaponized. The strategy Hannibal employed in the spring of 217 BC was not primarily tactical, it was psychological. He moved through Etruria, the heartland of Roman allied territory, and he burned farms, villages, settlements. He devastated the countryside in ways that were designed to produce political pressure on Roman commanders to respond, to act, to stop this destruction by bringing Hannibal to battle. He then, according to Polybius, marched his army past Flaminius's position at Arretium, past it, ignoring Flaminius, threatening the road to Rome in a direct provocation of a commander he had assessed as unlikely to absorb provocation without response. Flaminius followed. He followed without adequate reconnaissance, without sending cavalry ahead in sufficient numbers to map the ground he was marching into, without apparently seriously engaging with what Hannibal might be preparing for an army being led at pace through unfamiliar territory by an enemy who had already demonstrated his willingness to use terrain as a weapon. Whether this was recklessness or overconfidence or political pressure from Rome not to allow the destruction to continue, the sources give different weight to different factors, and historians still debate the precise balance. What is clear is that Flaminius followed, and Hannibal, who had chosen the ground specifically because it was suitable for what he was planning, was waiting. The terrain around Lake Trasimene in Umbria is specific enough that you can still visit it today and understand immediately why Hannibal chose it. The lake sits in a valley. The hills on the northern shore rise steeply. Between the base of the hills and the lake shore is a narrow strip of flat ground, the only practical route for an army moving west along the northern shore. The strip narrows in places to a few hundred meters, in some sections less. An army moving along this strip is constrained on two sides simultaneously, the lake on one side, the hills on the other. It cannot deploy left or right. It cannot spread out into conventional battle formation. It must move in column, a long, strung-out line of soldiers moving one direction along a path chosen for them by the geography. At the western end of this strip, the ground opens slightly into a small plain. Hannibal positioned his heavy infantry and African troops there, the force that would block the Roman exit from the defile and prevent the column from pushing through. On the hills above the northern shore, he positioned his Spanish and Gallic infantry and his cavalry, concealed, lying on the slopes, invisible from the path below in the morning fog. The entire northern shore of the lake was a trap, not a passive one, an engineered one. Positioned forces at the exit, forces along the full length of the route above, a natural barrier, the lake, preventing escape to the south. The only piece Hannibal needed was the Romans to enter the western end of the defile and keep walking east along the shore until they were fully committed, until the entire length of their column was inside the killing ground. Then the forces on the hills would come down, simultaneously, along the full length of the column, not at the front where battle-ready soldiers were prepared to fight, along its entire length, against soldiers who were marching, not fighting, who had not drawn weapons, who could not see more than a few meters in the fog, who would be hit from uphill by forces they could not see or count or understand the scope of. This is the blueprint, simple in its conception, extraordinarily difficult to execute. The Roman column entered the western end of the defile before dawn. Flaminius was near the front. The fog was thick. Accounts describe it as unusually dense even by the standards of early morning mist off the lake, the kind that reduces the world to a few meters of visibility in every direction. The column moved east along the shore. The vanguard emerged from the narrow section into the slightly wider ground at the western exit and encountered Hannibal's heavy infantry, positioned to block the way. Fighting began at the front. The rest of the column, strung out along the northern shore, kept moving east, toward the sound of fighting ahead, toward what must have seemed like the battle that needed to reach. They were filling the trap. The entire length of the Roman column was now inside the defile. 40,000 soldiers between a lake and a hillside in fog, moving toward fighting they could hear but not see. Hannibal gave the signal. The forces on the hills came down, all along the northern shore, simultaneously, not into an army that had formed to receive them, into a column, into men who were marching, who were looking east toward the fighting at the front, not uphill at a hillside they couldn't see through the fog. The noise of battle is disorienting in ways that are difficult to convey from historical accounts. The fog made it worse. Men could not see where the attack was coming from, could not see how many attackers there were, could not see their officers to receive orders, could not see which direction offered any possibility of movement. To the south was the lake. To the north and above were Hannibal's forces. Ahead and behind, the column was being hit at multiple points simultaneously. The Roman soldiers at the front fought Hannibal's blocking force. They had some space to form, some ability to organize. The soldiers along the middle and rear of the column had almost nothing. They were hit from the hillside, by forces coming down at speed, into a column of men so compressed that there was almost no room to raise a shield effectively, let alone swing a weapon. The fighting along the shore was close, personal, brutal in the specific way that battles become brutal when one side cannot see, cannot orient, cannot understand the scope of what is happening, and has nowhere to go. Some Romans pushed into the lake and drowned. Whether trying to escape or simply pushed there by the pressure of the fighting is not entirely clear from the sources. Flaminius was killed during the battle. The accounts of his death are detailed enough in Polybius to suggest it was recorded from eyewitnesses or near contemporary accounts. He was attacked by a Gaul named Eucharius who recognized him and killed him, reportedly in revenge for a Roman attack on Gallic territory years earlier. The general was dead before the battle was over. His army fought on for roughly 3 hours. At the end of those 3 hours, somewhere between 15,000 and 25,000 Romans were dead. Ancient sources give different numbers. Modern historians working from those sources give ranges that reflect genuine uncertainty. What is not uncertain is the scale. An entire Roman consular army destroyed in 3 hours on a lakeshore in Umbria. Roughly 6,000 Romans from the vanguard fought their way through Hannibal's blocking force and escaped westward onto the hills. They did not escape because Hannibal failed to stop them. They escaped because the fog lifted as the battle ended and Hannibal chose not to pursue immediately. The ground was difficult. His forces had just fought for 3 hours. The vanguard that escaped was moving away from the lake into terrain that offered defensive options. The escaped Romans took a position on a hill. Hannibal, one of Hannibal's cavalry commanders, surrounded them the following morning. They surrendered. Hannibal then did something that had significant strategic implications. He released the Italian allied soldiers among the prisoners, not the Romans, the Italians, freed them without ransom, with a message. He was not, he told them, at war with the Italian peoples. He was at war with Rome. The alliance that Rome had built with the Italian peoples was Rome's instrument of power. Hannibal intended to dismantle it by demonstrating that Rome could not protect its allies, that Carthaginian victory would not mean Italian subjugation, that there was an alternative to Roman domination that did not require fighting on the losing side. Whether this strategy eventually worked is a longer story, but the decision to release the Italian prisoners was not mercy exactly. It was a calculated strategic move by a man who was thinking several steps beyond the battle he had just won. The news of Trasimene reached Rome before accurate information could be controlled. The praetor Marcus Pomponius reportedly announced it publicly in the forum with the specific words, "We have been beaten in a great battle. No elaboration, no softening, just the fact." The city's reaction, according to ancient accounts, was intense. Crowds gathered. Women waited at the gates for relatives who were not coming back. The Senate moved quickly. They appointed a dictator, the first in 18 years, Quintus Fabius Maximus. He is the figure who gives us the word Fabian, as in Fabian's strategy, as in the approach to war that avoids pitched battle, harasses supply lines, wears down the enemy through attrition and denial rather than confrontation. Fabius looked at what had happened at Trebia and at Trasimene and drew a specific conclusion. Hannibal could not be fought directly on terms Hannibal chose. He shadowed Hannibal's army through Italy, refused battle, cut off foraging parties, harassed the edges without ever giving Hannibal the pitched engagement he needed to decisively demonstrate Carthaginian superiority to Rome's Italian allies. It was strategically sound. It was politically unpopular. Romans who watched Hannibal march through Italy burning farmland while the Roman dictator followed at a careful distance and did nothing were not grateful for the strategic wisdom. They called Fabius the delayer, cunctator, initially as an insult. He was replaced when his term ended. The commanders who replaced him fought Hannibal directly. At Cannae in 216 BC, the year after Trasimene, those commanders led the largest army Rome had ever assembled into the most complete tactical encirclement in military history. Somewhere between 50 and 70,000 Romans died at Cannae in a single afternoon, but that is a different story. Military historians have studied Trasimene for over 2,000 years. Several things about it are consistently identified as remarkable. The first is the intelligence operation. Hannibal knew Flaminius was following, knew his pace, knew the route he would take, knew the terrain along that route in enough detail to identify the specific section of lakeshore that offered what he needed. This level of intelligence did not happen passively. Hannibal had scouts, had informants among the local population, had the Gallic allies in the Po Valley who could provide information about Roman movements and local geography, had apparently his own careful personal reconnaissance of the ground he intended to use. The quality of intelligence determines the quality of preparation. Hannibal's intelligence was exceptional. The second is the scale of coordination, positioning forces along the full length of the northern shore, forces that had to move at night, take their positions without being detected, maintain silence and stillness through the early morning hours, and then attack simultaneously on a signal, required a level of unit discipline and inter-arm coordination that most armies of the ancient world could not reliably achieve. Hannibal's army could, because it was not a collection of tribal warriors who fought when they felt like fighting. It was a professional force that had been campaigning together for years, that had developed the kind of operational trust between units that only comes from sustained shared experience, that responded to command and signal rather than individual impulse. The third is the psychological operation. The entire spring campaign, the march through Etruria, the burning, the provocations, was designed to produce a specific state of mind in the Roman commander following him: urgency, impatience, the political pressure of watching Roman allied territory destroyed while the Roman army did nothing, the personal ambition of a commander who wanted the victory that would come from catching Hannibal and bringing him to battle. Hannibal needed Flaminius to follow quickly and carelessly. He created the conditions that made quick and careless following the natural response. That is not luck, that is preparation. Here is what makes Hannibal's Italian campaign one of the most studied and most debated subjects in military history. He kept winning: Trebia, Trasimene, Cannae. 3 engagements in 3 years that destroyed Roman armies on a scale that should, by any conventional measure of military logic, have ended the war. Rome kept fighting, not because Roman commanders became more competent. They didn't immediately. Not because Rome found a tactical answer to Hannibal's methods. It took years, because Rome had something Carthage did not: depth. The Roman alliance system in Italy was built over centuries. It was durable enough, despite Hannibal's Italian prisoner releases, despite his strategic messaging, to hold through defeats that would have dissolved most ancient political structures. City after city in Italy that Hannibal expected to switch allegiance after Trasimene and Cannae did not switch. The Italian peoples, for their own reasons, loyalty, fear, calculation about who would ultimately win, mostly stayed with Rome. Hannibal won every battle. He could not win the war, and the reason he could not win the war was not tactical, it was strategic. He had no siege capability sufficient to take Rome itself. His supply lines to Carthage were contested by Roman naval power. Reinforcements from Carthage were inadequate and intermittent. He was fighting a war of destruction in a country that refused to be destroyed. And Fabius Maximus, the delayer, the man Romans mocked for his caution, was, in the long view, correct. If you cannot win quickly, and Hannibal could not, you eventually run out of army. There is a version of Hannibal that circulates in popular history, the romantic version, the genius in exile, the man who crossed the Alps with elephants, the greatest general who never conquered Rome. The romantic version is not wrong exactly, but it misses some things. Hannibal was operating under strategic constraints that his tactical brilliance could not overcome. He had crossed into Italy with no firm plan for what happened after the Italian alliance with Rome dissolved. because he had expected it to dissolve after Trebia, and it hadn't, after Trasimene, and it hadn't, after Cannae, and it still largely hadn't. His strategy depended on a political outcome, the disintegration of the Roman alliance system, that required the Italian peoples to behave in a way they ultimately chose not to. He had no control over that choice. He could win battles. He could not make choices for the peoples of Italy. The Carthaginian government, meanwhile, was not uniformly behind his campaign. Rival factions in Carthage were skeptical of the Italian adventure. Reinforcements were contested politically. Resources that Hannibal needed were not sent. He campaigned in Italy for 15 years without decisive support from home, winning battles that he could not convert into strategic victory because the strategic conditions he needed never fully materialized. He was eventually recalled to Carthage in 203 BC when the Roman general Scipio, who had absorbed the lessons of Cannae and turned them against their inventor at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, defeated him on African soil. He spent his remaining years in exile, moving between Hellenistic courts, a brilliant aging general who various rulers found useful as an advisor and Rome found threatening enough to pursue. He died in Bithynia, modern Turkey, around 183 BC, surrounded by Roman agents come to capture him. He took poison rather than be taken. He was 64 years old. Lake Trasimene is not Cannae. Cannae is the battle military academies teach, the double envelopment, the tactical encirclement that influenced commanders from Julius Caesar to Norman Schwarzkopf. Trasimene established something different. It established that prepared ground, properly used, could negate the quantitative superiority that Rome's army represented. That intelligence, real intelligence, not assumptions, was a force multiplier that changed the arithmetic of battle before the first weapon was raised. That a commander's psychology could be read and manipulated into producing the behavior his opponent needed. And that fog, actual meteorological fog, waited for patiently across days of careful observation, could be a tactical asset as significant as cavalry or infantry or artillery. Hannibal did not have Roman resources. He had time, patience, intelligence, the ability to read terrain and weather and human character simultaneously. And on the morning of June 21st, 217 BC, he combined all of them with a precision that resulted in 40,000 Romans marching into a position from which almost none of them returned. Not because they were cowards, not because they were poor soldiers, because their commander had been led to the wrong place, at the wrong time, by a man who had spent weeks making sure that was exactly where he went. The fog burned off around mid-morning. By the time it cleared, the northern shore of Lake Trasimene was covered with Roman dead. The lake itself, which the Romans had driven into trying to escape, held more bodies beneath its surface. The surviving accounts describe the aftermath in terms that suggest scale beyond what individual writers could adequately convey. Polybius is relatively precise. Livy is more dramatic. Both are working from sources that were themselves working from the accounts of survivors and participants. What they agree on is the completeness of it. An army that had entered the defile that morning as a functioning military force had ceased to exist by noon. And Hannibal, who had chosen the ground, who had waited for the fog, who had positioned his forces in the dark along miles of hillside and held them silent until the moment was right, looked down from the hills at the result. He had done exactly what he planned, which should be, on reflection, the most unsettling part of the entire story. Not that 40,000 Romans died, but that one man had looked at a lake and a hillside and a fog and a Roman general's ambition and had seen, weeks in advance, exactly what was going to happen there. And been right. If this changed how you think about what military genius actually looks like, subscribe. The history of how battles were really won is almost never the version you were taught.